Good afternoon, everyone. We apologize for the delay, but we are so glad that you have joined us today. My name is Kelly Doolin, and I am a program manager with the Forward Promise National Program Office. We're so happy you could join us today for this informational webinar about the Forward Promise Fellowship for Leaders. We're very excited about this program supporting emerging and experienced leaders who are serving boys and young men of color and their communities. All participants are muted at this time. However, if you have questions at any point during this webinar, we ask you to please post them in the questions box on your screen, and we will do our best to respond to your questions during the Q&A portion of the webinar. This session is being recorded and will be available for playback in the event that you would like to re-listen or share it with others in your network. At this time, I would like to introduce you to the Deputy Director of Forward Promise, Dr. Rhonda Soifat-Bryant, who will be our primary presenter today. Dr. Bryant, I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks, Kelly. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's my privilege today to be on the webinar with you and give you information regarding our newly launched Forward Promise Fellowship for Leaders. For those of you who may be just learning about Forward Promise, I'll briefly give you an overview of who we are and what we do. Forward Promise is a national program office of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Our work is focused on the healing of boys and young men of color from the impacts of colonization, of historical trauma, and racialized trauma and stress through the use of culturally responsive, trauma-informed healing practices. As a national program office, we work to support organizations that create safe spaces for boys and young men of color. We challenge systems to use culturally responsive approaches. We empower boys and young men of color to tell their stories. We build a knowledge base of the community of practice to encourage the healing of boys and young men of color. And finally, we work to inspire leaders to practice, influence, and advance healing for themselves, their communities, and for boys and young men of color. The values and the mission of the Forward Promise National Program Office are guided by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's vision and commitment to build a culture of health in which everyone has a fair and just opportunity to be healthy. Which brings us to our Fellowship for Leaders. Since we opened our doors as a program office in 2017, we've been giving a lot of thought to the importance of supporting the development of strong, healthy leaders in the field of boys and young men of color. Leaders are critical to what we have come to term healthy village making. The fellowship builds upon RWJF's Leadership for Better Health programs that are working to develop strong interdisciplinary networks of leaders from every sector who have a shared vision of what shapes health and a desire to work together. The influence of leaders spans in multiple directions to impact individuals, families, organizations, and systems. As we've consulted with our National Advisory Committee members, former grantees and current grantees, colleagues and partners in the field about the needs of leaders, there's some key factors that have really stood out for us. First is that there's a growing awareness and knowledge surrounding the importance of culturally responsive healing practices as levers to vastly improve the health and well-being of boys and young men of color and to allow them to thrive. Leaders need to be supported and equipped to effectively incorporate these practices into their organizations, their institutions, and communities. And so our goal is to support leaders in growing and honing their vision of healing to effectively incorporate these practices and influencing stakeholders in their respective communities to support their visions. We will share Forward Promise tools for combating dehumanization and our Heal, Grow, Thrive model as tools for implementing these visions within communities. Second, we know that collaboration between leaders can sometimes be challenging for several reasons, a couple of them being sometimes leaders in a common field are finding themselves competing with each other for the same limited resources. And two, sometimes there's a generational divide within organizations between elders or more seasoned leaders and younger or emerging leaders. And so our goal with the fellowship is to really facilitate positive collaboration in a non-competitive environment for leaders to create an intergenerational cohort that encourages bidirectional learning between youth and elders, emerging and experienced leaders, where they're able to recognize and appreciate each other's assets and expertise. And third, we understand that sometimes leadership can be isolating and it can take a toll on both the physical and emotional health of people who are attempting to work to benefit boys and young men of color. So we recognize the need to heal the healers. If leaders are working for the health and well-being of boys and young men of color, they must put their masks on first, so to speak, in order to have the strength for the work that they do and to have longevity in their roles. And leaders must also model self-care and prioritization of physical and mental health as an asset in their communities. So through the fellowship, we seek to provide leaders with time and space and a safe place to retreat, reflect, and recharge throughout our retreat-style convenings. So to reiterate, the purpose and the goals of the Forward Promise Fellowship are to provide leaders with time and safe space to retreat, reflect, and recharge within a supportive community, to facilitate positive collaboration in a non-competitive environment for leaders to create an intergenerational cohort that encourages bidirectional learning between youth and elders, emerging and experienced leaders. And third, to support leaders in growing and honing their vision of healing to effectively incorporate these practices and influence stakeholders in their respective communities. Funding for the fellowship is provided by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and we're also very happy to be partnering with the amazing folks at Frontline Solutions for their expertise in program design, strategic planning, and implementation for this 18-month experience. So who are we looking for in the fellowship? We're seeking applicants who have demonstrated a significant vision and a deep commitment to fostering healing for boys and young men of color in their communities. Applicants may be ages 18 years or older, of all races or ethnicities, of all gender and gender identities, and in all US states and territories. The fellowship is open to US citizens, permanent residents, and individuals with DACA status. Applicants can be from any field or area of expertise. There's no minimal educational requirement, and previously incarcerated individuals or those with criminal convictions or records are welcome to apply. The selection of this cohort of fellows will be based on a variety of factors that our program office determines are important to create a cohort that's diverse across a number of factors, including ethnicity, geographic region, gender, visions and ideas for healing, and levels of experience. So what do we mean when we say emerging versus experienced? Rather than determining the level of experience of leaders based solely on age, Forward Promise has decided to also evaluate years of experience that applicants have working in their communities on their vision for healing for boys and young men of color, as well as how far along is their vision in terms of implementation or impact. These are all considerations in the creation of a cohort that has diversity in both age representation and experience in an effort to support our goal of a truly intergenerational group. So what constitutes a vision of healing? Forward Promise believes that healing can and should take place individually, as well as in families, communities, and in systems. We recognize that healing means different things to different people. And we believe that it's circular and it's an ongoing process, and it takes a number of aspects. It takes place, in a number of ways and aspects with regard to self and community. We define healing as help seeking upon realization that trauma or pain has occurred, and of restoring one's connection to one's humanity and the already existing assets found in one's culture of origin, such as storytelling, drumming, art, etc. We want to know what healing means to you as the applicant and why you believe that your vision of healing can restore boys and young men of color in their communities to their true and whole selves. Now I'll cover a few of the benefits of the fellowship experience. As a fellow, participants will gain the following: First, a monetary prize totaling $10,000. Disbursement of the prize will occur with 50% or $5,000 being paid upon selection and being approved as a fellow in September or October of 2018, and the remaining 50% or $5,000 being paid upon completion of all fellowship activities at the end of the 18 months. Forward Promise will provide all appropriate documents for tax filing, and we also strongly recommend that you consult a tax professional to determine any financial impact of being a recipient of this award should you be selected, because the National Program Office is not responsible for any taxes incurred. Fellows will also have opportunities to build relationships within a supportive, diverse community of leaders with a common goal of healing boys and young men of color in their communities. Fellows will also have opportunities to share and gain exposure to well-established or historical cultural practices for healing, as well as promising new and emerging ideas to support the boys and young men of color to heal, grow, and thrive in their communities. Fellows will also have increased recognition of their leadership and their work in regional or national networks and the boys and young men of color field. I'll take a moment now to describe the activities of the 18-month fellowship experience. There will be 4 all-expense-paid in-person retreats to take place incrementally over the course of the 18 months. These in-person retreats will be designed to provide fellows with the time and space to develop their individual visions, incorporate new knowledge about effective culturally responsive healing practices, collaborate with other leaders in a supportive, non-competitive environment. They will also have the opportunity for personal reflection on your leadership journey and healing time to recharge. There will also be web-based leadership training and workshops held in between the in-person retreats as a way to maintain connectivity as a cohort, to introduce new knowledge and materials, and to share updates on progress. We will also develop a virtual platform to facilitate ongoing relationship building and collaboration among the cohort of fellows. The curriculum topics for the retreats and the webinars will be customized with the input of the selected cohort of fellows. All of the materials are being framed by the Forward Promise definitions of healing, growing, and thriving. The curriculum is rooted in culturally responsive practices, yet at the same time is sensitive to the uniqueness and diversity of communities and their needs. The curriculum will also encourage bi-directional learning across cultures, experience levels, and generations. I'll now turn it back over to Kelly to describe the application process in greater detail.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bryant. So the application process, the open application period is from July 2nd through the 20th of 2018. We would like to be sure that all application materials are submitted online through the application portal, and that materials are not sent as separate attachments via email or other means. We would also like applicants to be mindful that there are Word and media file size limits for uploading, and we would ask you to please be mindful of those. And in the event that you are having issues with the size of your file, we also recommend using an online file shrinking program such as videosmaller.com that can help your files fit to size. However, if you do have any issues with inputting your application information or materials, we do ask that you reach out to us and let us know, and we will work quickly to resolve any issues you may have. Materials required to complete the application are basic demographic information about yourself that allows us to be able to contact you and understand who you are, a name and contact information for 2 references, an essay of 500 words or less that shares with us your vision of healing for your community. You will also be asked in the application portal to provide a series of responses to short answer questions of 200 words or less each. And we ask you to pay close attention to the word limitations on the short answer questions as well. We also ask that you would upload a non-professionally recorded video, a video that can be recorded on your cell phone or other device that is 3 minutes or less, telling us about yourself and your vision of healing. We also ask applicants to obtain a letter of support from your affiliated institution, organization, or employer if applicable. We just want to note that you're not required to be affiliated with an organization in order to apply. However, if you are, we simply want to ensure that your organization supports your participation in all activities related to the fellowship. And now I'm going to share with you some important dates that we would like you to keep in mind and be aware of as you go through the application process. As we previously stated, the application period is from July 2 to July 20, 2018. July 20 at midnight is the application deadline. We anticipate that fellows will be notified of their acceptance by the end of August or August 31st, 2018. Following notification, fellows will engage in an intake process or interview process where we will gather more personal information about you and develop biographical sketches, which will then be followed by a public announcement in October of 2018. The fellowship period, which is an 18-month period, will last from October 1st of 2018 and extend through April 30th of 2020. With our first virtual convening of our cohort of fellows being held in October of 2018, and our first in-person retreat to be held on November 16 and 17 of 2018, with the location to be determined. We hope that this information has been helpful to you and has answered your questions. At this time, however, we will pause to take any questions that may not have been answered during the webinar. If we are not able to get to them all today, we will add your questions to the FAQ or frequently asked questions, which can be found on our website at www.forwardpromise.org. Also, please be reminded that the slides and recording of our webinar today will also be made available on the Forward Promise website. If you have additional questions or concerns, you can also email us directly at leadership@forwardpromise.org. So I do not see any questions in the question box at this time. Give you just another moment to be sure. I do see some individuals who raised their hands during the session. If you have a question, if you could please post a question in the questions box. Okay, I do see a question now. I'm going to read the question that we have currently. Will the retreats be in locations that reflect recharging and healing, or will they be in a general office setting? Dr. Bryant, if you could answer that question for us.
It is our goal to always select retreat locations that do have a retreat style feel that will offer you some opportunities for reflection and being out in nature. We are not planning to utilize hotels or your typical conference style settings.
Thank you. I do have another question. I saw that we had some challenges with sound in the beginning, and yes, we did. We apologize for those technical difficulties, but hopefully those were all resolved. Yes, there's a question, applicants can be located in any location in the US, and the answer to that question is yes, they can. Dr. Bryant, we have another question that says, can a husband and wife partnering in their work submit an application jointly?
We would ask them to submit applications individually. We have 20 slots for our fellowship cohort. And so we would want those applications to come in individually because they would count as 2 people for the cohort.
Thank you. And there was another question that was very similar to that about applying as partners. So hopefully your response to that one also answered this individual's question. Another question we have is, can the $10,000 award be given to the organization that a fellow is working with in order to help their salary, or does the award need to come directly to the individual?
We are currently structured for the award to go to the individual, but that is a question that I'd be happy to follow up on an individual basis with that particular applicant to resolve.
Thank you. There's
Kelly,
another question. Go ahead.
I had a question come in on my side. The question was about the deadline, what's the time zone? So we will say that the deadline is the 20th of July at midnight Eastern Standard Time.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. There is another question. Can 2 people from the same family apply?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Another question we received is, can we submit a program that our nonprofit agency is already implementing?
Yes, you can submit that as evidence of implementing a vision for healing, as long as the person who is the applicant for the fellowship has a significant leadership role in the implementation of that program within the nonprofit organization.
Another question is, can you please give us an update on how Forward Promise was spun out of RWJF? I think they're asking about the relationship of Forward Promise to RWJF.
So Forward Promise is still a program of Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. So it is not really a separate entity. It is directly funded by the foundation. A national program office relationship with the foundation just means that instead of Forward Promise being managed internally by a program officer, the foundation has selected leaders externally in the field who they believe can lead the work and maintain its connection to the foundation's overall culture of health. So the Forward Promise National Program Office has been authorized to operate for 4 years in this capacity to manage the grant making as well as a field building strategy that is reflective of the ideals of RWJF, as well as our program office ideals around the issue of healing and growth and thriving for boys and young men of color.
Thank you. We received a request to state again about the non-professional video. One component of the application asks that you upload a video that is 3 minutes or less that tells us about yourself and your vision for healing. What we mean by non-professional is that we did not want a professionally produced video, that an amateur video will suffice for that application component. So hopefully that answers your question where that is concerned. Okay, we've got a lot of questions coming in. The application can be found on our Forward Promise website. If you go to our homepage, a question was, where can the application be found? If you go to the homepage for Forward Promise at forwardpromise.org, you can click on the Apply for the Fellowship button that is in the top right corner of our homepage. Or you can also go to forwardpromise.org/fellowship, and that will take you to more information about the fellowship, and also link you to the application portal. Our next question is, for those of us that work in both community and academia, do you want letters of support that represent both spaces?
So I would say that you can provide letters of support certainly for either. You don't have to provide letters that cover both. Whichever entity can really speak most effectively about your work around a vision of healing for boys and young men of color and your commitment in that regard.
Thank you. Another question, how many fellows will make up this cohort?
There will be 20 fellows in total.
And how long do you anticipate each of the 4 on-site retreats being?
We anticipate that they'll be about 2 days long each. So factoring in time for travel, depending on the location, you may want to factor in 3 days to be able to get there and get back home.
Okay, and another question we received is, how will you evaluate the effectiveness of this fellowship?
So there are several things that we'll be looking at. I think whether or not the fellows have increased their abilities to implement their vision of healing in their respective communities. So is the work that they're doing now more effective as a result? Have they gotten greater exposure and as a result been able to implement more effective culturally responsive healing practices in their respective communities? Whether they feel that they have gained greater skills or assets as a result of participation, whether the fellows have increased their social network after having been connected and have also been able to increase their professional or personal platform to elevate the importance of their vision of healing within the field of boys and young men of color. And finally, if fellows are able to see and recognize that they have had an opportunity for greater self-reflection and if that has had an influence or impact on their work.
Thank you. Another question we have, I am the director of the organization that I'm affiliated with. Do I need to submit a letter?
A letter of recommendation.
I believe they're referring to the letter of support.
Okay.
Doesn't think so specifically though.
So yes, if you are the director of the organization, we would still ask that you submit a letter of support. It could be from the chairman of the board if your organization has a nonprofit governing board. That would, I think, suffice in that case.
Another question we have is, if hotels are not used for retreats and in-person meetings, what will the locations be like?
So we have not selected all of the locations yet, but it is our commitment to ensure that the locations are comfortable and accessible for people with a variety of needs. I'll give an example. We recently held a retreat for our grantees, and we did it at Haley Farm in Clinton, Tennessee. And they had reasonable accommodations on the farm, but they were more cabin style, where 4 people would be sharing a space. And so because some of the grantees were strangers to each other, we didn't want to impose that kind of requirement. And so individuals stayed at a nearby hotel, and we shuttled them into the farm and did all of our daily activities on the farm property. So we'll take all of those kinds of things into consideration as we select retreat locations, so that we have a balance of what we would deem, modern comforts, as well as a reflective and appropriate retreat style experience.
We have another question with respect to the references. The question is, do we need to submit contact information for references only and not reference letters, or reference letters with contact information?
Kelly, can you respond to that one? I believe it's set up a particular way in the portal.
I believe that you only need to submit the contact information for your references. We can
double check that as well and include that in the FAQs.
Please repeat where we can find the replay. Once the recording is ready, we will post the replay of this webinar on the Forward Promise website. Another question we have is, once you start the application, can it be saved and returned to at a later date? And the answer is yes. You can save your application information as you go along. You do not have to complete it all in one sitting. You will be asked to create a login or an account when you start your application, and therefore able to stop if you need to and return to it at a later time. Is the deadline July 20th, midnight Eastern time? Yes, and that is on the 20th. When it turns to the 21st is the question. And so yes, the 20th, July 20th is a Friday. That Friday at midnight, as it turns to the 21st, is the deadline Eastern Time. Another question we have, if you are currently trying to figure out how to implement healing practices into new work with young people, both boys and girls, in 7 different states, would that be a strength or weakness in the application process? Dr. Bryant, I will ask you to respond to that.
Okay. I don't think of it as a strength or a weakness. I think we're more interested in the content of what a person is trying to implement, and whether it's grounded in culturally responsive practices, and whether they can demonstrate that they have a solid plan for how they would go about doing the work. But we would not weigh an application more heavily either way if you're trying to do work in several states versus if you're doing work in your individual community.
There was a question about the age limit, and I just would like to reiterate that anyone ages 18 years and older is invited to apply. So the minimum age for applicants is 18 years of age. One question, and I believe this is our last question. If we've missed any, we will be sure to add them to our FAQs or to respond to you in an email. But this question asks, if our work is both with boys and girls, can we speak from that perspective?
Yes, absolutely, you can.
Dr. Bryant, I have one last question that we'll close with, and I'll ask you to respond. It says, today is the first that I've heard of the program, and I would like to know if there's a possibility to have more time after the 20th deadline.
Unfortunately, we're not able to extend the deadline because we need to be able to move all applicants through the review process. However, there is a lot of information on our webpage regarding the work of Forward Promise that you're welcome to review if you find that it would be helpful in crafting your application.
Well, we thank everyone for your time today. Again, if for some reason we have missed your question or have not been able to respond to all of the questions, we will be sure to reach out to you after this broadcast, or to add any questions that appear frequently to the frequently asked questions, which can be found on our website. Again, you can find more information about the fellowship at www.forwardpromise.org/fellowship. You can also email us at leadership@forwardpromise.org. Thank you so much for your time today and participation in our webinar. We hope you have found the information to be helpful, and we look forward to hearing from you and to learning more about your visions of healing for boys and young men of color in your community. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.